Okay. All right. Time. All right, let's get going here. Okay, so apologies for sending you, very late notice about the room change. Honestly, there was about a 5-minute gap. I requested it right after class on Tuesday, and there was about a 5-minute gap between the time that I received the email saying it was changed and the time I sent you the email, and I deployed, Andu over to that room to try and redirect people. So likely there's going to be people kind of coming and going, well, hopefully not going, but coming for a little bit here, because I assume not everybody checks their email religiously, and the hike from CSC is a half decent one. Okay, so welcome back to Sociology 376. So this is Sociology of Religion. Hopefully that's why you're here. So we're going to keep going and kind of talking about what is religion, but just a couple things to remind you, because there's been a little bit of movement in the course, right? So I've set up, obviously a Slido where you can ask questions, right? Because it's a big room, and especially if you're sitting in this corner, for reasons of the shape of this room, I'm probably going to have my shoulder towards you a lot. I'm really sorry. I'll try to face straight forward sometimes. But you can use this to ask questions, right? So just go to slido.com, enter that code or QR code that, and it should work. I didn't have time to test it. I redid it hoping it would work. I'm going to test it now to make sure everything's working, because last time it didn't work. It works. Well, I'm going to assume that it works then. Yay! Exclamation point. Okay, I'm now confident that everything is working. Right, so this is a good way to ask questions, as we go through. And, I have it kind of scattered throughout. And if you ask questions anytime, and I'll try to get back to them. If at this juncture you have any questions about the course material and how the course is going to run, now is a good time to ask them. So basically what I said is, I see them as, I always say supplemental. Supplemental is the word that I want to use, not optional, right? So everything you need to do well in the course is covered in the lectures, right? The readings are supplemental, right? If you want to go into more depth, or sometimes, right? Okay, I'm going to move that. My explanation maybe isn't making complete sense to you, so you can go and look at those. And in a lot of cases, like when we get to the theories of secularization, I have the actual papers, right, that a lot of these theories are based on. So you can go and read it from, authors like Rodney Stark and Steve Bruce and Mark Chavez, and just kind of get it, as it were, directly from the horse's mouth. So sort of, I would say supplemental, but definitely there's nothing in the readings that I don't talk about in class that then you need to answer any of the questions that are on any of the exams. Okay, so now I'm going to jump forward because we were a little further than this, and just kind of catch up. And maybe I'll go right back to here, and we'll just sort of do a quick summary, because I know first days, right, we're still getting our heads in the game and people are coming and going. So we're talking about definitions of religion, right, because our project to start the class is to define what is religion, like what is even the object that we're talking about, which I know seems really simple, but as I hope to show you as we go through, it's actually one of the tougher concepts in sociology to adequately define. Okay, so I sort of stated, right, 3 big categories of definitions, our substantive definitions, our functional definitions, and our social constructionist definitions, right? And we looked at that first category last time. We started a little bit talking about functional definitions. So these functional definitions, right, are based on what religion does and how it works in social or psychological systems, right? How it does things like give meaning or coherence, right? Order to the world. How it organizes groups, right? How it's, creates social order, and how it, it can be marshaled to defend group interests or rally groups around to protect against external enemies. And then it's psychological functions, right? Providing stories, right? Giving, again, sort of meaning to individuals, like, I'm suffering, why, right? Why are bad things happening to me even though I'm a good person, right? Or why is that, person who bullied me in high school now a millionaire and I'm not doing so great, right? What's the kind of story of why things are the way they are? And then symbols, things that organize kind of our physical existence. We'll talk about what these are a little bit when we get to Smith's definition. But anything, right, like crosses, on buildings or, in your personal possession, any kind of religious symbol, right? The Bible, the Quran, Bhagavad Gita, right? These are all, in a sense, symbols of different religious things, right? Sometimes you'll see them dangling on the mirrors of cars driving around the city, right? Rosaries or, typically I think Hindu kind of symbols. These are all things that are generated, but anything that kind of has religious significance in this functional definition is a symbol. And then rituals, right, that organize life and give it a kind of a structure, right? Whether this is like, harvest festivals that have religious intonations or, weekly religious service attendance, right? These are all rituals, prayers before meals, the Passover, the Seder meal at Passover for Jews, or what, the Mass for Roman Catholics, whatever it happens to be, right? These are the rituals that kind of structure life. Okay, so for functionalists, right, they view religion as a set of tools, right, that organize structure and help us interpret the world, right? So it's instrumentalized, as I said last time. I won't go through all these definitions again. I think the most functionalist of functionalist definitions of religion is the one that Gertz gives us, right? That's a system of symbols which, act to establish powerful, pervasive, long-lasting moods, motivations in men by formulating a conception of general or conceptions of general order and of existence and clothing them in such an order of reality, or factuality rather, that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic, right? That is an absolutely 100% hardcore functionalist definition of religion because it tells you what religion does, right? That's its core kind of, purpose in a definition like this. It's social function. And here's where we ended off last time, talking about this kind of definition. One of the big problems with functional definitions generally is that they're way too broad, right? So it's really, really easy to include a bunch of things which clearly aren't actually religion, right? And so the example that I gave here is American nationalism, right? And so you can see, as I said last time, how well this fits Gertz's definition, right? So these are, a bunch of symbols, a system of symbols, if you will, that have to do with the United States, right? Everything, the flag, the Lincoln statue, the bald eagle, Greenland, apparently, I don't know. So thank you for laughing at that. It's a terrible joke. White House, Liberty Bell, Mount Rushmore, the Capitol, I don't know what probably the Rose Garden, right? You could put the Constitution in here, the Founding Fathers, all of these things that are symbols of America, right? And that do all of the things that Gertz sort of sets out, right? It establishes long-lasting moods in people, right? Americans are not unique in the world, but they're motivated by this mythology of what America is to act in certain ways and do certain things, right? It sets out a general order of the world, right? Like I said last time, the Declaration of Independence, says all men are created equal, and from that equal creation, they derive certain rights, amongst which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So that's a general order of existence, but clearly American nationalism, despite its, the fact that some people, and we'll talk about Robert Bellah, we talk about theories of religion, talk about American nationalism as American civil religion. I think we shouldn't include American nationalism in religion because it's obviously a different phenomenon, just one that shares a lot of characteristics with religion, but also lacks some really important ones. Okay, and that is where we left it off last time. Can I turn my microphone up a bit? Are we talking about online or in person, like in the room, or online? Because those are two different things. Where is my microphone set to online? Max volume, no, it can't be online. I'll just move it closer to my face. C'est quoi? Oh, in person, really? It is now at 100%. There is no, I can talk really loud, if that helps. I can speak extremely loud. I was going to say voluminously, but that's a different word. Okay, well, hopefully that helps. Cuckoo. All right, I might have to move this back down. There we go. All right, so we ended off with that. And today we're going to talk about other categories of definitions and some of their problems. Wow, that seems way too loud to me. I'm going to turn it down to 98. There, that's better. I feel like a deity when I talk so loud. And there's reverb in the room, so I feel like, hello, Moses, it's me, God. I'm here in this burning bush. Okay. All right, so substantive definitions. So substantive definitions, again, have to do with what's in religion. And this is another one of the big categories of definition sets, right? Now, I'll warn you, I'm going to tell you this right away, so you can start thinking about this, or worrying about it. Maybe I shouldn't tell you. No, I'll tell you now that I've said it. One thing that I'm going to do on the first midterm is I'm going to give you definitions of religion, like actual ones from different scholars that you haven't seen, and then you're going to have to tell me what category they fit into and why, and what's wrong with them, right? So, if you think this is just an exercise in me setting things up, no, this will be on the exam, and so you'll have to, and again, you'll have your notes, so you'll have all of these things, but you will definitely, I will give you just these random definitions of religion that I found in the sociology of religion literature, and be like, hey, is this a functional, substantive, or is this a critical definition, right? Or a social constructionist / critical definition. Okay, so this is not all for naught. Okay, so substantive definitions typically define religions in terms of what they believe, right? So substantive, think substance, right? The content of religion is core. And this assumes that all religions basically are going to share common patterns and content, right? That they might differ in some of the details, maybe a slightly different understanding of what a divinity is, but they're all going to share a kind of basic sense that religions have a divine, right? Okay, so there's some of the definitions you can find, right? E.B. Taylor defined religion as the belief in supernatural beings. Okay, Herbert Spencer, right? Religion is the recognition that all things are manifestations of a power which transcends our knowledge, right? So these are obviously definitions that have to do principally with, some kind of supernatural power, right? So usually a deity, and in, I guess E.B. Taylor's is a little bit more general, but Herbert Spencer's, tends to suggest a personal one, right? Something that has a mind, in general, right? Okay, so typically there's the view that religions embrace God, God's spirit, or some kind of supernatural, metaphysical, or transcendent reality or realm, right? That there's something sort of beyond the physical that religion makes reference to. Okay, so this comes with some obvious problems as well, right? Substantive definitions are often seen as too exclusive, right? And it's pretty easy to start picking things apart because you can find what is clearly a religion, say, that doesn't make reference to transcendence, spirits, or gods, right? So an example of that would be, I always have such a hard time saying this word, Theravada Buddhism, right? Which is a form of Buddhism that really assumes no ultimate reality, no metaphysical realm at all. And there's a lot of different, usually smaller religions that don't have a concept of, say, certainly a divine or a spiritual realm at all, right? Now there might be, we'll talk about that. I don't want to ruin Smith's definition. Superhuman beings that have more power than humans do, but exist as part of the natural world. So there's no real transcendent realm. You see this in a lot of, say, folk religions, across kind of human history, right? Even something like, Greek mythology, what you had in Greek mythology was, say, like the Greek gods are actually just like super powerful beings that exist not so much in a transcendent realm, but in a physical realm, right? So, transcendence or spirits, right, that tends to be, or some kind of God, especially one that knows more things than we do, tends to kind of fit really well into Western molds of religion, right? It fits Christianity, Judaism, Islam, even something like Zoroastrianism out of, Persia pretty well. But a lot of Eastern religions, a lot of African religions, and certainly indigenous religions of the Western Hemisphere sometimes do and don't include these sorts of things. So any definition is going to break down and not work if you can find at least one example of a religion that doesn't fit it. And substantive definitions have a lot of religions that just don't fit, right? Okay. So how are we doing for questions? No questions. Our last big category, right, is what we call social constructivist definitions of religion. Now, these categories tend to focus almost entirely on, so generally they'll say, religions are too diverse for a single definition to encompass it, and that's probably a relatively smart move, given the diversity of religions and how hard it is to define them. Instead, what they do is they look at religion as just another social construct, and look at things like the process by which systems of belief come to be called a religion, right? So you certainly find this sort of definition in Marx, right? And I've got a great big Marx quote here, but you'll find it, and we'll talk about, his theories of religion as well. We'll talk about Freud, Sigmund Freud, and what he thought of religion, which is very much in this social constructionist kind of category. Ludwig Feuerbach, right, who is a huge influence on Marx as well, very much a social constructivist or constructionist in terms of their thinking, right? So generally, they view religion as merely emergent from social systems, often as, a form of social control. All right, and so this is, Marx, because Marx can never be concise about anything. Sorry, I'm not a big fan of Karl Marx. I don't love reading him. So if you're like, Marx is my homeboy, I'm really sorry. You're going to hear me bad talk Marx fairly continuously, especially when it comes to religion. Okay, so Marx's definition, right, the foundation of irreligious criticism, right? So that's what he sets out to do is criticize religion from an irreligious point of view. And here you have it, right, this constructionist, man makes religion, right? Religion does not make man, right? So what is religion? And for, for people like Marx, and you'll see this with Freud as well, Freud thought that religion is just wish fulfillment, right? We project out a vision of, and especially because I think Freud had daddy issues, fight me. I think I can prove that. He's like, we just want a kind of all-knowing, compassionate father in the sky to make up for our terrible fathers here on earth, right? I think Freud probably had a pretty terrible father. That sort of tracks. Right, but it's a reflection of things that human beings want, of human social orders, which is why, so basically a society generates a religion that serves to essentially create, but certainly substantiate and support the social order that is there, right? And again, I think this is a view, as much as I rag on Marx. Okay, so let me read some more of his thing and then I'll tell you what I think. Religion is indeed self-consciousness and self-esteem of man who is either not yet won through himself or has already lost himself again. Okay, Carl. Germans, man. They write like hard sentences. But man is no abstract being squatting outside the world. Man is the world of man, right? So that's the social constructionist part. State and society. This society produces religion, which is an inverted consciousness of the world because they are an inverted world, right? Which is basically like, we create religion. Religion is a reflection of us, right? And I won't read the rest of it because you can read it, right? The struggle against religion is therefore indirectly the struggle against that world whose spiritual aroma is religion. God, I mean, you could turn a phrase. Okay, I will say, this is a view with some virtue, right? As much as there are problems with social constructionist versions, I'll talk about in a second, one of the things that they do better, say, than maybe a functional definition, and certainly than I think a substantive definition, is a social constructionist vision of religion at least allows us to explain why we see such tremendous variability in religion, right? Why there aren't as many common patterns, right? If religion just emerges from the existing social conditions, different cultures have different social conditions, right? The social conditions of the Indus Valley, where we think Hinduism sort of springs up, are going to be very different from, say, the kind of highlands in Canaanite Israel, where we think Judaism emerges, right? So it makes sense that Hindus and Jews would believe very different things because those religions emerge from different social conditions and they reflect those social conditions. So there is virtue in this definition, and I think Marx and other social constructivists make a really good point that, yeah, religion is shaped by the cultures that, they come out of. So, well, we'll get to that. Okay, I don't want to, I spilled coffee on me. Can't waste any. We'll get to that, right? Particularly, in Smith's definition, there is a notion of superhuman powers that religions sort of need, and American nationalism doesn't have. But we'll get to that more. Like we'll cover that as we get to, I think, a better definition of religion. Okay, so one of the really, really big problems with constructivist visions of religion, and this is, often a sort of problem with sort of Marxist type definitions in general, is that they have a difficult time accounting for change, right? So change is a problem, right? Oops, highlighter, wrong tool. Okay, back to the pen. So change is a problem. So if religion is ultimate, and the other thing that, let's say, social constructivists will tend to say is that religion is typically a sort of function of the elites of a society, right? It emerges from whoever has power, the power to, basically construct a religious system that supports their social position, right? It's a pretty straight up social constructionist definition. So what you would expect is that religion would inherently just, oops, what did I do? Doing that all day. would ultimately create pretty stable societies where it's really, really difficult for social change ever to happen, right? However, I mean, that certainly happens, right? Sometimes religion is a force of stability, right? It can create tremendous social stability, but there's all sorts of problems with it, right? Sometimes something weird happens, like the religion of an underclass bubbles up, right? And actually sort of takes over a larger society and leads to a lot of social change. That's certainly the story, largely of, say, Christianity, right? Christianity more or less starts out in the Roman Empire as a religion of marginalized people, for the most part. It's not one that necessarily is from the elites. It's much more grassroots. And it leads to essentially a whole revolution of the way the Roman Empire is run, right? I mean, eventually probably to its collapse as well, but that's neither here nor there. But religion has often played a role in a lot of social change. It can be the catalyst or a supporter of social change. We'll talk about that more a little bit later, but you can certainly think of something like Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights movement as an example of this, right? King uses explicitly kind of Christian language to advocate for a change in the way races relate to each other in the United States, right? He mobilizes religion very much against the status quo, and I think in that case is largely successful. Okay, so if religion is just a reflection of society that supports its social norms, and especially the norms of the elites, social change should be really difficult, and religion should always be against it. And that's simply, even a cursory look at history will tell you that that isn't the case, right? You could look at other examples. For example, the wide adoption of Islam in Persia, where essentially it took what was principally still an Arab ethnic religion, and then essentially universalized it by the Persian adoption of Islam and saying, we are adopting Islam and now we're just as much Muslims as the rest of you. And that's a very, very glancing overview of that particular historical circumstance. Books have been written about that particular transition, so I'm being very broad when I say that. Okay. So, basically, our three big categories of definitions of religion are all beset by crippling problems, right? None of them are universal enough to encompass everything. Either they're too broad or they're too narrow, or in the case of social constructionists, there are actual problems that they simply can't explain. And, essentially sociology of religion sort of kicks off with Durkheim, right, in the, his elementary forms of religion, or maybe with Max Weber's The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. But, through the entire basic end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, people struggle to try and come up with a really good definition of religion, right? So, it's so complex and culturally different in different places that by the time we reach the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, a lot of people are like, look, we're never going to get a definition of religion that fits everything. And so you get sociologists of religion saying things like, I can't define religion, but I know it when I see it, right? So it's like, it passes essentially the smell test or the visual test. It's like, well, that looks like a religion. That, of course, is not a great definition of religion. And then you get, Andrew Greeley, who was a Jesuit priest and a sociologist and a researcher at the University of Chicago, specifically in the National Opinion Research Center at University of Chicago, or NORC. They do the General Social Survey every couple of years. He said, very famously in a journal article, that defining religion was hopeless, and so we should just stop trying and just all proceed like we know what religion is, even though we can't define it, right? And, broadly, some other big sociologists at the time, like Rodney Stark, objected to this, but could never really generate a workable definition of religion either. And I think this basically continued until about 2017, when Christian Smith, and I'll tell you about Chris in a sec, wrote a book called Religion, What It Is, How It Works, and Why It Matters, where he comes up with what I think is, if we're going to have a good workable definition of religion, Christian has given us about the best we're going to get to. Okay, so, this is the book, right? Religion, What It Is, How It Works, and Why It Matters by Christian Smith. And if you know me at all and you've taken any other courses with me, you'll probably know that, I'm a big Christian Smith fan. And yes, you can be such a nerd about an academic discipline that you can be a fan of a particular sociologist. And I'm a big Christian Smith fan, right? So Chris has been kicking around for a long time, basically since the 90s. He was at UNC Chapel Hill, right? It's one of the most important schools in the US. It's not an Ivy League school. Started a big project called the National Study of Youth and Religion when he was at UNC Chapel Hill, but then got a too good to pass up offer at University of Notre Dame in Indiana, right? And that is where he currently resides. And one of my great regrets in life so far is I haven't had a chance to meet Chris. Last year, the other place where I teach a few courses is St. Joseph's College, and they were bringing in a guest speaker. And I was like, who is it? I was like, some Smith guy from the US. I'm like, is it Christian Smith? And the dean was like, yeah, it's Christian Smith. I'm like, okay, I will drive him around for the whole week he's here. It turned out it was Christopher Smith. I don't know who the fuck that is, but I don't care. I'm not driving that guy around. I was like, if it's Christian Smith, I will be his personal chauffeur for as long as he's here. I'll abandon my family. I don't care. But it was not Christian Smith, sadly. They played a cruel trick upon me. Christopher Smith, I hope his plane crashes. I don't know. I'm kidding, of course. I wish him no ill will, but I feel duped. Okay, I got very excited for a little bit. Okay, so Christian has been, kicking around writing about religion. If you know anything about me, I have a very dark sense of humor. It gets me in trouble all the time. So, please don't write the dean saying that I've planned the murder of some poor American academic. I haven't. I just have a really dark sense of humor. Okay, so Christian Smith has looked at a wide variety of topics. Probably what he's most famous for is his study of youth and religion in the US, right, in the National Study of Youth and Religion, which is the biggest ever kind of study of teenage and emerging adult faith. But he's also written things about the role, the role and structure of evangelical Christianity, right? He wrote one of the defining books on evangelicalism, which is American Evangelical, Embattled and Thriving, and on race relations between evangelicals and how evangelical theology contributes to the racial divide. So he's in my opinion, and I'm in charge here, so my opinion counts, the best living sociologist of religion around. Now, is he my favorite sociologist of religion? Technically not. You'll find out I also have a very strange relationship with a now deceased sociologist of religion named Rodney Stark, which you will probably get tired of hearing that name because you're going to hear about him a lot. He's my favorite. He's like a human honey badger. Just don't give up. But we'll talk about Rodney later, and I'll tell you my favorite Rodney Stark stories. I don't know why my son is calling me, but he should know better. Decline. He'll call back if it's really urgent. He probably is like complaining that there's some kind of limit on his laptop. I don't know. He's played his games, or that I blocked all the sites where he was playing Subway Surfers on the web when he should be doing schoolwork. Laptops are evil. Ban them from schools. Australia has it right. Okay, so Christian Smith's definition of religion, right? Deceptively simple on the surface. Religion is a complex of culturally prescribed practices based on premises about the existence and nature of superhuman powers, whether personal or impersonal, which seek to help practitioners gain access to and communicate or align with these powers in hopes of realizing human goods and avoiding things bad. Okay, we are going to go through this, like if I show you my next slide, I have different parts of this definition highlighted, and we're going to go through it, so that you'll probably wake up from dreams in the middle of the night just reciting the definition, like it's a religious mantra of some kind. What I love about this definition is Christian has gone to extreme lengths to fit everything in and exclude, like anything that could be religion should fit under this sort of aegis, but exclude, anything that doesn't count as religion, like American nationalism or the free market or anything like that. So it's wide enough that I think it'll get most religions, and narrow enough that it won't include things that aren't religion. All right, let's, I don't know, questions? Any questions? Thank you. That was how I felt. Oh, okay. So, religion. What do we mean by superhuman powers, right? So this is actually, like superhuman powers, he's being very deliberate in the way he phrases this. This whole definition, right, it's artistry, academic artistry, because every word means something very important. Okay, I think superhuman powers is one of the very key ideas here, right? And what makes it work and why it gets to include enough stuff but exclude all the things that don't kind of fit this definition. Okay, so superhuman means that these powers are, at least to the people who believe in them, right, believed to be able to influence or control aspects of reality that are beyond human control, right? So they're more powerful than humans, right? They can affect nature, right? And this could be like, they can control storms, right? They can control the weather, bring rain or hail, or influence the outcome of human events through their influence, right? So they can help your country or your tribe win a war against other people, right? They can heal. They can do things, heal things that humans wouldn't necessarily be able to heal. So they have power or influence to control some aspect of reality that human beings can't, right? And that's why humans turn to them for help, right? If we could do it ourselves, we typically will, right? And this will link to other kinds of concepts, in theories like rational choice theory, which I'll talk about later because I don't want to get ahead of myself. But yeah, I mean, typically people who are religious believe in some kind of superhuman power. And yeah, they're superhuman because they can make things, which is why they're superhuman. Okay, so religious communities, right, believe in these superhuman powers take their existence and nature as given. They aren't human creations, right? So they exist independently of human beings. So if you are religious and you believe in a superhuman power, you don't think that these powers were created by people, right? And so if tomorrow human beings disappeared from the earth, right? I was going to give an example, but that's probably too traumatic, right? Let's just say it's one of those movies where poof, everyone's gone. In the religious conception, all of those superhuman powers would still exist. They existed prior to humans, and they exist independently of human beings, right? Okay, now, all right, I will say this part, and I'll explain why this particular point really, really matters. So people might need to worship them, feed them, or appease them, but they didn't create them, right? So human beings will have a relationship with these superhuman powers, right? Like in the case of the Greek gods, you might make sacrifices to them, right? Or, Mesoamerican deities, right? You might make sacrifices of, animals or crops or other human beings or whatever to these superhuman powers to appease them or get them on your side, right? If you ever read like Greek mythology, things like the Iliad or the Odyssey, right? A whole bunch of time is spent burning shit to try and make the gods be on your side. It's like, uh-oh, bad stuff is happening to us. We need to, burn some things and send the smoke up to the nostrils of the gods, right? That's a big part of those religious systems. So you're trying to appease them or get them on your side, get them to use their power for you, or maybe, you have to worship them. Maybe what they want is your devotion or your submission, whatever it happens to be. but human beings didn't create them. They are not a reflection of human psychology or anything like that. Okay, so they are distinguished from other superhuman activities or that are generated by human activity, right? So something like nationalism, right, is in a lot of senses a superhuman power, right? It exists beyond the control of most humans, and sentiments of nationalism can make things happen. Or things like the invisible hand of the market, right, which is a concept that we think kind of works, right? There's this invisible force in the market that sort of moves prices higher when demand increases and supply shrinks, or some combination of those, right? That favors some products and not others. There are these forces that are beyond human beings, right? No single human can control them, but that we all kind of, live with the effects of those things. However, right, if all of us disappeared from the earth tomorrow, market forces also disappear, right? The invisible hand of the market is a thing that happens because of human beings. It is not a thing that happens independently, right? If we all disappear, there's not the spirit of the market being like, well, there are no humans, but I'm raising grain prices anyway. That's what governments do. Okay, so something like the invisible hand of the market is a superhuman power, but it's not one that exists independently of human beings. And the nation state too, right? Nation states like America are superhuman powers, right? But they aren't superhuman powers. Like they're beyond individual humans, but they don't exist without us. Okay. So here again, and I'm sure you've read ahead, but I'll explain it anyway. Christian Smith, whoops, that's the wrong thing. Sorry, sometimes I get my tools mixed up. All right, we're going to try that again. Highlighter. Superhuman rather than supernatural. Kind of like what I was saying before, superhuman implies that they have greater power than human beings. Not that they exist, like supernatural implies that they exist outside the natural order. But in a lot of systems, like Greek mythology, right, or Mesoamerican mythological systems, the superhuman powers are just other things in the universe, right? Zeus is a thing, right? He's an actual being, and you know that because occasionally he turns into a duck and goes and gets frisky with ladies, right? And impregnates them, or a bull, right? Actually, I think it's a swan. He turns into a swan. Duck sounds funnier. He turns into a swan and he goes and he sexually assaults someone and she gets pregnant with some mythological monster. Or a demigod. I can't remember which one comes out of the swan. Anyway, Greek mythology is weird. Right, but Zeus is a thing in the universe, right? He is way more powerful. He can affect fates and the weather, and he, I guess in like popular interpretations, he throws lightning bolts. The Russell Crowe Thor movie kind of version of who Zeus is, which is actually not a terrible representation in the sense that this is just another being in the universe, right? And he superseded earlier superhuman beings, right, the Titans, but ultimately it's just another thing in the universe, right? And lots of religions have this kind of system where, good gods, spirits, demons are all things that are part of the natural order. They're not necessarily supernatural, right? They're just superhuman. They're more powerful than us. But at the end of the day, they might be immortal or live really, really long, but they still exist in the world. They're not like outside the universe. Okay, now, it'll include those things. Now, it also includes deities that would be outside the natural order, right? So those are also superhuman powers. They're just transcendent ones. So if you think of like, oops, now I'm writing with a highlighter. What a fool I've been. I don't want yellow. I'll get it together, I promise. Yahweh in kind of Judaism, right? God in Christianity, which is also, I guess, Yahweh. Allah in Islam. now I'm forgetting the one in Hinduism. It's escaping my brain now. Brahma, in Hinduism, right? These are all forces that kind of exist outside the universe, that are not inherently inside the natural system, but they're still superhuman powers that can affect things. So Smith's definition can include those things that are in the world, right? Spirits, goblins, demons, and also those kind of superhuman powers that are outside the natural order. So it can kind of fit both of them into that notion of superhuman powers. Okay. How do cults differ from superhuman powers? Aspects of this definition. Okay, I mean, so it really depends on the new religious movement, right? In some, right, you might have someone making a claim to divinity, right? That they have some kind of amazing power. In others, right, they're just positing that there's some superhuman power that has, spoken to them and given them some special revelation, right? So it very much depends. New religious movements, I don't want to say are a dime a dozen, but there are so many of them. And I think, I honestly tried to count, and I know there's at least 10 new religious movements that are active in Edmonton. A lot of them are weird. They're like really modern ones are all into sex magic, right? Like you have sex with the founder of the religion, and that's how you release the healing. It's not self-serving at all. What was it? Nexium, right, was one of these ones that was basically based in Vancouver. So it was also it was combining cult and multi-level marketing into one of the most evil things possible. It's like, is this a cult or is it multi-level marketing? It's worse than that. It's both. Oh God. Right? So there's lots of variability in new religious movements, right? And yeah, this person is going to claim some kind of divine power and usually some kind of ability to prove that, when the comet comes, it'll take us all to a new planet or a new reality, right? That was the Amway times Scientology. I was going to say Tupperware, but Amway's probably worse than Tupperware. Amway's especially hideous and insidious. Inhidious. So yeah, that's essentially it, right? Nexium was kind of like that, but even worse because there was sex stuff with the founder, so really, really dark. But yeah, often those founders are gonna be like, I am the representation of God on earth, or I am the new deity. But in there, right, they're essentially still making that claim to being a superhuman power and being able to affect reality in some way, right? So, cults really kind of lean into the same, they would fit into the same definition, or new religious movements, as it were. The American system is de facto attributed to God, which would fulfill the superhuman part. God is there, and of course, the American system sort of says, well, God favors us more than any other place, right? That's Ronald Reagan's metaphor, taken from biblical text, that America is the city on the hill. But American nationalism, in this sense, right, they might say God is on our side, but not that America itself is a God. Well, maybe that's coming. I don't know. It's been a weird week, abducting foreign leaders and doing some piracy on ships in international waters. So, maybe El Trumpo is on his way to declaring himself God. I don't know. It's possible. Anything could happen with that guy. I probably should call him El Trumpo. This is being recorded and put on YouTube. I'm going to get banned from the US. Or I'm going to get abducted by people in helicopters. I don't know which. That guy said something mean about me. We're going to put him in Guantanamo Bay. It's going to be the best professor of Guantanamo Bay ever. Yeah, please. So there's a lot of variability in those kinds of experiences, right? Where you would have, people often suggesting that they'd received some kind of message from a superhuman power. If you're talking about prophecy, You're in a different kind of realm there where, people will declare, like David Koresh, who was the leader of the Branch Davidians. He named it after himself. Crazy. Was like, well, I'm the new messenger of God. He's speaking to me. But usually it's in relation to some kind of superhuman power. And premonitions are usually like, either maybe you're attuned. Now I'm sounding like Star Wars. You're attuned to some kind of force that's letting you know things are going to happen, right? I feel a great disturbance in the force. Or something like that, right? Or that you're being spoken to by some power that's giving you insight. But it's always in relation to some power that has the ability to just like see the future, or I don't know, midichlorians that make you really fast or attuned to the universe. I don't know what it is. That's Star Wars. That's not a real religion. Okay. Okay. So let me put it this way. So superhuman is just anything that's more powerful than a human being. Now, maybe I should draw a Venn diagram. Let's put it this way. Everything that is more powerful than humans would be a superhuman power, right? So, the water spirits or water nymphs in Greek mythology are superhuman powers, right? They have extra powers over reality that human beings do not, but they exist in the natural order. So they're superhuman, but not supernatural. Now, supernatural things say, let's put it this way. We're show my Western bias here, but it'll work, right? God in Christianity, right, is definitely a superhuman power, but he's also supernatural, right? So he's outside of nature, right? And the Christian conception of God is that God exists outside of the universe, right? Not part of another thing in the universe, but outside the universe in some way, right? Now that's still a superhuman power. It's just one that's also supernatural. What Smith is trying to do is say, okay, we want to make sure that all of those religions that maybe have superhuman powers that aren't supernatural get included in this definition of religion, right? So if you believe in, evil spirits roaming outside and causing people to go mad, right? That's still a sort of religious belief in this system, even though that thing, is in the universe, right? And say the kind of Jewish and Christian notion of, say, like angels, right? Or I guess this is shared by Islam as well. Angels are superhuman powers, right? They exist at a higher pitch of existence than human beings. They're more powerful than human beings. They're closer to God than human beings, but they technically exist outside the universe, right? They can kind of go in and out, in a sense. They can kind of enter the universe and leave again and go back to heaven. So they're supernatural, right? Even though they count as a superhuman power. I hope that helped. I guess everything that is supernatural is also superhuman, but not everything superhuman is necessarily supernatural. I don't know if you can give me a thumbs up. Okay. Okay, hopefully that helps. Is faith in religion, if the faith in a religion vanished, the superhuman power would not vanish too. Would this not mean? Okay. So I see what you're saying. So if faith in a religion vanished, would the superhuman powers not vanish? All right. So in this conception, right, that Smith is kind of laying out, he's saying that religious people believe that the superhuman power that they believe in, right, whether it's Loki or God in the Christian sense, if everybody stops believing in them, the people who believe in those religions would say those things will still exist, right? Whether anyone believes in it or not, those are fundamental kind of aspects of the universe that God exists, right? So if every human being stops believing in it, that doesn't matter, God still exists. That's the belief of the religious people, and that's what Smith is saying. They assume that these superhuman powers exist regardless of human beings. Now, if you're talking from, like, say, like a constructionist or a metaphysical naturalist kind of perspective, which is what sociology tends to presume, you of course wouldn't assume that, right? You would say like, well, if everybody stopped believing in God, then God doesn't exist anymore, right? Because it's no one believes in it and no one's acting in such a way. But, you know, if you go down to the Vatican and you have a chat with Pope Leo is going to tell you, hey, it doesn't matter if you believe in God, God believes in you, right? Sorry, that's terrible. That's a trite way of saying it. But, right, and if everybody stops believing in God, that doesn't stop God from existing. That's what a religious believer would say. I'm assuming that's what Pope Leo would say. I don't want to speak for the guy from Chicago. He might take on my kneecaps. I don't know. I'm sure he's perfectly nice. Okay, so I think I answered that question.